Okay, I'd like to welcome all of you, all of our wonderful listeners, to our next edition of our series, Let's Get Real. I am so happy with how this series is coming along and how we're getting such incredible people to speak with and talk to them about their experiences and the wisdom that they have to share and offer all of our listeners. And we've been getting such wonderful feedback from all of you. So thank you so much for those of you that have emailed and written in and let us know how much our programming is making an impact on your life. And today, I'm especially excited and honored because I have my very own father, my wonderful father, who has so graciously agreed to sit and talk with me a little bit about some of his experiences. And, growing up as a little girl, it was a normal thing for me that I had a father who was a renowned lecturer and a famous speaker, and people knew him all over the world. When I was young, my father was traveling to South Africa, Hong Kong, the Soviet Union, the former Soviet Union, all these like exotic places. And for me, it was just a regular part of my life. And I grew up hearing about all his adventures and all his stories, and I would listen to them with such pride, and I would never get bored of them. It was just part of my childhood. And we had people coming in and out of our house. My father has, from a young age, he has wanted to help people. He has a love for every single Jew, and he's impacted thousands of people with his wisdom, wanting to bring them the knowledge of Torah and share with them the wisdom of our Judaism and our heritage. And he's in front of me now, so I can't fully talk about my father fully and completely, and my words would not do him justice. But my father, not only has he started organizations and helped with bringing, Torah down to the masses and to explain it to people, but he's also been a principal of 2 Torah day schools, and he's been the dean of a secondary school in the UK. We've lived in many different places around the world, and my father has 6 wonderful children, but that's subjective. We are all following in his footsteps in the family business, so to speak. So that says a lot. And he has, we're not counting anymore, but he has a lot of beautiful grandchildren and even great grandchildren. And it is my honor today to have my father talk to us a little bit about his early days as a teenager, and how he had this passion in this excitement for the land of Israel, and how this excitement got him on a journey all the way to Israel by boat when he was a teenager, all by himself, and how this love and passion for Israel got him on a journey that impacted his life to this very day. And he was able to influence so many people for the good. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce my dear father. Welcome, Tati.
Hi, Shifra.
So good to have you.
It's wonderful to be here. I mean, I knew a lot of wonderful things about you, but that you exaggerate to that degree, I really never knew.
Yeah, well, from my perspective, it's all true. As a daughter, looking at you from this vantage point.
I'll remember that.
So you're sitting in Israel.
I am.
Right.
I'm at home. This is our home. I'm in my study. And I'm talking to you. I can't believe it. This is one of the advantages of Corona. I finally get to see my kids and talk to them. It's a great excuse.
I know. Who would have thought that we've been able to do a program like this a year ago? No one was even thinking like this. Correct. And now I get to have you come and share you with my wonderful audience, my wonderful program, and I don't even have to fly you in. You could just be sitting in here. But we would love to see you in person. I hear you've been, my father for, just so you can understand, has been pretty much in quarantine now because thank God he is well on in his years. So he is in that, the demographic of, people that are at risk for having highly at risk.
So, I hear an echo.
You do?
Do you hear it? Yeah.
Oh, I don't hear an echo on my end.
Okay, that's good then.
Yes, no, for me it's good. I hope if it gets too hard for you, then we can stop.
No, it's okay. Again. It's okay.
Okay. So, so my father's been in quarantine for 10 months now. So it's
Sunday I get out.
Woohoo! He got his second vaccine.
I'm getting my second vaccine.
You're getting your second vaccine. And then hopefully we'll be able to see you in person soon for Passover.
With God's help, yes.
We're very excited. Okay, so I want to start, Ta, if you can help us just describe a little bit about your early years as a teenager and what got you so excited and so in love with this idea of traveling to and this idealism for the land of Israel.
Okay, so the truth of the matter is, if you're going to talk about my teenage years, if I can remember that far back, we have to go back even further.
Okay.
Even further. When I was in 4th grade, we were guinea pigs. We were guinea pigs on the first day school that opened up in Chicago, Illinois. There were no Jewish day schools. There were no Jewish schools. There was a Jewish high school, but there was not an elementary school. And this elementary school, I was in the 4th grade, and they wanted one of the children to speak at the graduation of the 8th grade. Okay, for some reason, I don't know why, but little old me, I was little and I was small and I was, very skinny. And so they chose this little kid, and it was me. And I had to learn a couple of lines. And the line that I had to say was, if I forget thee, O Yerushalayim, O Jerusalem, let my right hand fail. And if I don't keep Jerusalem on the front of everything that is important in my life, then I have missed out on what the essence of being Jewish is all about. That was what they taught me to say. But it stuck with me, and it stuck really well. And I can still remember raising my hand and speaking in front of this audience. And that was the first time I ever spoke publicly. But that's where it began. That's how it started. And then growing up as a bar mitzvah boy, as a teenager, Chicago, Illinois had no Jewish youth programs, or at least not religious ones. The only one was B'nai Akiva. B'nai Akiva was a very strong Zionist group of wonderful, wonderful people that which stood for Torah and Avoda. The idea was that you have to put the two together. There's the Torah and there's the effort of what was the Avoda? The Avoda, of course, was building the land of Israel. And I remember, just to skip back just a bit, that I must have been in the 4th, 5th grade, 6th grade maybe. Ben Gurion came to Chicago, Illinois.
Oh, wow.
Ben Gurion came to Chicago, Illinois, and they brought all the kids out. And we had Israeli flags, and we were shaking those flags for Ben Gurion. You got to understand what the world was like in the late 1940s and the early 1950s. And it was such a big deal. And I'm telling you, all those people that are called today, the anti-Zionist and Haredim and who knows what other name you want to put on people, but they were all out there. And they were all clapping. And they were all crying because the prime minister of the state, of the Jewish state of Israel, came to Chicago, and we saw him, and we relished in that. Look.
So you're saying there was a sense of unity back then that unfortunately we don't have today, that there was this unified desire and love.
That's all there was. You know, I always put it this way. When I was growing up, I knew every yarmulke in Chicago, almost. The south side, I didn't know so much, but on the west side, the north side, I knew everybody that wore yarmulke. What does that mean? Because we were all together, and it didn't matter what color it was and what you looked like and what you were inculcated with from your grandparents and great-grandparents. The idea was we were all there together as Jews, and we were very proud. You know, I'll tell you something. My mother, Aleh Shalom, who I'm sure you remember very well, she was, this is right after the war, in the late 1940s, early 1950s. She she didn't want me to walk in the street with a yarmulke. And she wanted me to wear a baseball cap. And I wore a baseball cap. I was a good boy. I listened to my mother. And I wore baseball caps. We went to the Cubs game. We went to a baseball game. And with my friends, and I had to they were wearing yarmulkes, and I was wearing my cap, but we made sure that we were talking very loudly in Hebrew. So they should all know who we were. There was a sense of pride in being Jewish and being connected to the state of Israel. And the Bnei Akiva is what inspired and created that love for Zion, that love for and it's not the political Zionism I'm talking about right now. Please don't get the two together. Don't mix the two. I'm talking simply about the homeland of the Jewish people, where it was given to us by the Almighty himself, promised Avraham Avinu to our forefather Abraham. And that was something that was just percolating within us.
That's beautiful.
And when I graduated high school, so it was obvious that I was going to go to Israel. I mean, where else would I go? A lot of my friends went to different schools, to yeshivas, and to New York and to Cleveland. But I was going to Israel. And I came to Eretz Yisrael in 1961 when I graduated high school.
So, I mean, just hearing the way you're talking, this energy, this passion, I'm like feeling it across the computer. And I'm realizing that this is something that is so powerful, giving our children something to be excited about, something that to stand for, that I don't even know if my children feel this sense of pride and excitement for their heritage and who they are. We go through the customs and we do all the mitzvot and we try our best, but this sense of, this is who I am, I would love to be able to instill that message into our children today. And I think that idealism has been lost to some degree. A little.
You're 100% right. That's the problem of our present generation. And not that I'm such an expert on this generation, believe me. Some of the things, I mean, look, I needed you to help me set this all up. You didn't like the way I looked, so you told me how to sit. You told me where to stand. Look, I adapt, okay? But the world today is totally different than the world was then. And one of the things that is so crucial is that today everything is immediate. Everything is immediate. There's nothing that you yearn for because you can get it right away. All you got to do is press 2 clicks and you get it today. That's what it's all about. That's what the whole system is all about. And it has, I believe, caused an enormous amount of weakening of idealism, both in the United States, here in Israel, all over the world. There's something of idealism. Then we were living for something that was greater than we are. In other words, we weren't the center of everything. There was an ideal that was far greater than we are. And that's part of the essence of what it means to be Jewish. Because to be Jewish, it means you have to know that there's something outside of this physical world of ours that is the Almighty. And our amazing ability that he gave us to connect to him. We can connect to him. So anyway, yes, it's a different world.
Yeah.
It is.
Okay, so I remember growing up as a little girl, hearing the stories of when you were, I don't know, 17 years old, 16 years old. How old were you?
When?
When you went to Israel on boat.
16 years old.
16 years old.
Yeah, I graduated high school a little bit early.
Okay, that makes more sense. I was like, how did you graduate high school?
I graduated, well, I graduated in June, and in September I would be 17. So you can call me 17. Okay.
So you traveled by boat, 17 years old, on your own.
It was cheaper. It was the cheapest way to go. We called it dormitory class. Downstairs in the bottom of the boat. And we had a window, but you dare not open it because you'd sink the boat.
Oh,
we were under the water.
That is crazy. So tell me a little bit about that. Tell me about your experience on this boat. How did your parents let you? I can't imagine letting my child go so far away by boat and not having a way of communicating instantly like we do today. It's almost like a different world. Can you tell me a little bit about that experience?
Going away on boat, I'll tell you what my parents said. It happened actually that they dropped me off at the boat on a late Friday afternoon, and they had to go back to where they were staying in New York for Shabbos. We drove from Chicago to New York, and the boat left on Friday night. Okay, but that was my house. It was like my house, picked up and left. So I was going along with my house, and my parents always said that after Shabbos was over, they took my brother and they all went back to the dock where the boat was. They felt like they were criminals returning to the scene of the crime. That's the way they said they felt. And the boat wasn't there anymore. And it was off. And we went off on this journey. And what made it possible, there are two things here. First of all, what made it possible for me was very exciting as a kid to be able to be on a boat and a ship. It wasn't just a boat, it was a ship. And
you didn't go with any friends? It was just you?
No, I did not have any friends. Well, at least not when I got on the boat. I'm on the boat with my yarmulke, and a lady comes over to me, and she says, "I can see you're Jewish." I said, "Yes, that's right, I am Jewish." She says, "Listen to me. My two girls are on the boat, and I need somebody to look after them. I want somebody to take care of them. Would you just kind of keep an eye on them and make sure everything is okay?" I said, "Yeah, I'd be happy to." And she called them over. They were 17 and 18 years old, her little girls. I had a great time. But it was something, because it took us 13 days to get to Eretz Yisrael. 13 days. And
for those of our listeners, Eretz Yisrael is the Hebrew way of saying the land of Israel.
Okay, correct. I'm proud of you.
Yeah, thank you.
Took 13 days to get to Israel. Okay, 13 days. Do you know what those 13 days were like? One big, they had used to have an end, I think it was Heinz ketchup or whatever it is. And you know how it does, till it comes out, it goes and it goes and goes. And they used to play in the background. Bottles. Anticipation. No, those, I don't even know how it goes. I mean, if I did, I wouldn't sing it. But I'll let you do that. But the idea was that we had such anticipation. We couldn't wait. One day went by, and 2 days went by, and even in the middle of the storms that we had on the boat, when we had there was a theater on the boat, right? So there were films that they were showing on the boat. So I was there in the theater, and I was looking at everybody in front of me, and they're all going like this. And like this, and like this, and I couldn't understand why they're all shaking, and I didn't realize I was doing the same thing. And when we got out, the boat was just, we were really in a storm, and there was little receptacles along the way, because in case you got a little bit of seasick, they made sure that
goodness.
That's the way. It was an amazing thing, though. But we had an enormous had enormous. I mean, it was such an exciting time for me as a teenager. Can you imagine? On my own, I was able to drink coffee. My mother never let me drink coffee. Here, I was able to drink coffee all by myself. And we stopped throughout Europe. The boat stopped, and we went out. And one of the amazing things that happened was when I started to go out together with my friends that I made on the boat and a few other people. We would go and tour in Naples and Piraeus, and it was just Lisbon. It was amazing. But one thing I found out that shocked me, not everybody wanted to be an American. They didn't want to be American. I was thinking about how lucky I am. I have an American passport. I'm an American, and everybody wants to be American. I came from America, the land of the free, the home of the brave. I mean, today people don't say that anymore. God forbid, you'll cause a riot. But the idea was that it shocked me, and I learned something about looking at the perspective from somebody else's point of view. What is their perspective? And they just weren't interested. They couldn't really care less that I was an American.
These were once you had arrived, you're saying?
No, I'm saying once we docked in a port, like in Lisbon or in Naples, we docked in a port. We met people on the street, and they thought, "Where you? No, it was no big deal. You're from America. So
you're
what?"
Like just a regular person that just happens to be from a different country.
Exactly what it was. It was right. Really, and there were some beautiful things there, lovely things that we saw. But, the world is beautiful. There are amazing, wonderful things in this magnificent world of ours. So until 13 days, but the idea was another day closer, another day closer, another day closer. Wow. And I remember that moment when we could see all the way in the distance, all the way in the horizon, something that they were telling us, that's Haifa. You're looking at Haifa. And all it was a big tower of, a water tower. But we got so excited seeing this water tower. Can you imagine? Because that was Israel.
Unbelievable.
And that was the boat trip. It was an amazing thing.
Wow. I mean, I can't even imagine that kind of experience today where a parent will allow their child to go solo to opposite ends of the world.
I owe my parents a phenomenal debt and gratitude. In Hebrew, there's an expression called Mesirus Nefesh, sacrificing. To be able to sacrifice. My parents, and we were just the two of us, my brother and I. And my mother and father both. It wasn't so hard on my father because he was European and he was used to going studying. When he was 7, 8, 9 years old when he left home to go study in the yeshiva. And then, so it was a different kind of a world. But my mother, she was an American girl. She grew up in, and born in Trenton and grew up in Canton, Ohio, and in Detroit. And she was prepared to let her little Mashiach, and you know what Mashiach? That was me. Yeah, you know how long it took me to realize I wasn't? It took, my mother loved me so much, right? But
just like a good Jewish mother loves her firstborn boy.
That's correct, exactly it. And she let me go because she knew that I would gain and I would learn and I could absorb from personalities that I met and I would meet that were far greater than anything I could have in the United States.
Amazing. Now, did you always want to be a rabbi and study the Torah? Like, where did this desire come from?
Well,
how did that happen?
Actually, no. When I was in high school, I had a chemistry teacher, actually an organic chem teacher, and he was a rabbi too. He was Rabbi Dr. Feder. He was originally from St. Louis. Actually, he was a student of my father's, who was a teacher in the yeshiva in Chicago. But he had just inspired us all. I mean, not only with the chemistry that he was teaching us, but the fact of what he represented, a religious, God-fearing, honest, wonderful human being, caring human being. And he just infused us with a lot, me and others as well, but at least I was infused with a tremendous sense of wanting to learn more about chemistry and organic chemistry particularly. And yeah, I was planning to go because I was in Bnei Akiva. I was going to go to Israel. I was going to come back, and I would go on to I had a scholarship in Roosevelt University, and I was going to come back, and I was going to continue on to be a chemist. Well, that didn't quite work out that way. Because when I finally was in the yeshiva, and I was studying under enormously powerful and brilliant people, and more than, it wasn't just their brilliance, it was their sensitivity and character that just overwhelmed us. And I decided that, you know what, all right, so I won't come back after a year. I'll stay another year. I'll learn some more. And then slowly. Anyway, I spent 4 years in the yeshiva in Israel, and I gave up on that scholarship. And when I came back home, eventually, so I continued on in the yeshiva, and this is the way it was.
Got it. Wow. So let's continue the journey a little bit, because we're going to get to some really juicy stuff right now.
Oh,
so
boy.
When you came off the boat and you stepped out onto the land of Israel for the first time, can you describe what the land, what the country looked like back in the early 60s, and then compare it to the way we all know it to be today?
I'm telling you, it is, it's a miracle. It's an open miracle. People want to see miracles. I've seen miracles in my lifetime, and probably this is one of the biggest ones that you could possibly imagine. When I came to Israel, there were no expressways. There were no 4-lane highways. When I came to Israel, even the biggest, the most oft-traveled and the big route was to go from Tel Aviv to Haifa, and that was because it was on the Chof, on the shoreline, and they carried us from Tel Aviv to Haifa, and Haifa to Tel Aviv. And my yeshiva was not far from Haifa, so I would make that journey quite often because we had relatives in Tel Aviv. It was a 2-lane little bitty teeny weeny highway, and that was it. Most of the roads were dirt roads. There were obviously a lot of paved roads too, but it wasn't like it was, my image of, I don't know if any of your listeners have ever been to Jerusalem and they had the experience of going to what they refer to as Shuk Machane Yehuda.
Oh, yes.
It's a market. That's the way I, as a kid, 16 years old, imagined all the streets of Israel looked like. There was concrete buildings. There were no skyscrapers like there are today. There was Jerusalem, the wonderful city of Jerusalem, the beautiful city of Jerusalem, had 3 traffic lights. That's it. Only 3. There weren't that many cars. So you want to know the difference? There weren't that many cars. Lots of buses, but very few cars. And there was one traffic light as you entered the city. And there was one at Yafo and King George. And there was one, in the middle of, by what they called Kikar Shabbat. But that was it. You know why?
Were you able to go to the Kotel or any of those places at that time?
Not in 1961, you couldn't go. It was all in Jordan. What are you talking about? We would go to a certain point, and if we looked up, we would see Jordanian soldiers with rifles pointing at us because they had occupied no old city, no Kotel, no Kever Rachel, the tomb of Rachel, none of the patriarchs in heaven. None of that was accessible. We, in order to get to anywhere near what we call the Kotel today, yes? You couldn't get to the Kotel, that's for sure not. The only way you can get to the Kotel is if you would take a trip to Cyprus and lose your passport, have to take a new passport that didn't say that you were in Israel, that you could go then from Cyprus to Jordan. I never did that because my name is Yehuda, and it would not. from today till tomorrow. I don't have an English name. It's always Yehuda. So they wouldn't have let that happen.
That
but anyway,
applied very well.
No, they certainly wouldn't. A friend of mine tried doing it, and he ended up in big trouble. They almost sent him off to Egypt, which that was the worst thing you can imagine. It was terrible because they found in his luggage tefillin. That's what the bar mitzvah boys put on and men put on every day. So the idea that that we couldn't get to these places was so painful. It was painful. And you would go to a place called Har Zion, which is a little bit before the old city, and you would climb up to a roof and you'd see a little arc of the gold dome, just a little, and we'd get so excited. Oh, look at what we could see. It was an amazing thing. I mean, and that was the love. And going into Yerushalayim, going into Jerusalem, that spending time there, it was like it was putting you back in history. And I'll tell you one other last thing about that period. I imagined within myself, wherever I was in Israel, that it wasn't just, it was history coming alive. Everything I learned in the Chumash, in the 5 books of Moses, and everything that I learned in the Nach, in the prophets, and this was coming alive. They walked here. They were here. They participated here. It was all real. It's so much more difficult today when your picture of what you read about is quote unquote seemingly very, very primitive without all of our modern conveniences and so on and so forth. And how can you relate to Israel today to the way it was then? It was a lot easier. I mean, outside of my yeshiva, I would walk for 10 minutes. I was out in the foothills of the Carmel Mountains. It was like, it was overwhelming. That much I can tell you.
Wow. So, I mean, hearing you describe what it was like in the early 60s, it sounds pretty much like a third world country, completely not built up yet. And a mere, a few decades later, we look at Israel today, how technologically advanced they are and booming in every area, in fashion, in cuisine, in technology, in medicine. I mean,
wine.
Of course, wine. How could we forget that? I mean, it's just mind-boggling how this small country has advanced in such a small amount of time. I mean, when we go, and I take my amazing women with me to Israel on the Momentum trips, and we get these tours of the land. I mean, it's just thriving and fully built up. And we stay in these beautiful hotels, and we just really, I mean, relatively beautiful, but it's unbelievable. We eat the most delicious food, and thinking about like the contrast of what you had to go through just not so long ago when you put things into perspective. It's amazing how far they've come and what they've been able to do.
It is. That's why I said it's a miracle. You don't see this anywhere else. This is a miracle of this unique property, this real estate here in the Middle East called the land of Israel, which is not only the physical land, it's filled with the inspiration and the spirituality of well over 4,000 years. That's what you can plug into, so that's
amazing. I remember you telling me when we were talking about how it was like to write a letter or talk on the phone back home.
Oh yeah, just try it. It wasn't like today, you press a button and hi ma, how you doing, everything okay. You wrote on these aerograms. Aerograms were a letter, and it was very light paper, right? And the letter itself would be folded, and you could turn it into an envelope. So the outside, the one portion of this aerogram was where you put the address, and the other side you wrote your letter and you sent it off. You put a stamp on it. They had stamps though. They had stamps. You got to pay for it, and you send it off. Well, mail from Israel to America, and from America to Israel took, when you're lucky and you didn't make the mistake and didn't not to write airmail, because you had to write airmail. Because if you didn't write airmail, it was an aerogram, but you had to write there Doar Avir. It had to go by, that's airmail. So it would take months. Like this, it took 2 weeks. So I wrote a letter and I asked questions and I told my parents about what was happening here and so on and so forth. 2 weeks later, they got the letter and they read all about it. And of course, they wrote immediately an answer. I didn't get it for another 2 weeks. So it's a whole month since I asked the question and it wasn't relevant anymore. And the one time I made a phone call. So that was, I mean, look, Israel is wonderful. But the one thing is that they inherited from the British. When the British were here, it's called bureaucracy. And the bureaucracy here is very complicated and very involved and so on and so forth. But then to make a telephone call, you had to order the phone call 2 weeks in advance. And you would go to the central post office in Jerusalem, on Rehov Yafo, you would order your telephone call, and you would be told on this and this date, you can come and you can get the call, and they would make this call, and you get through with the call, and you would, I called home one time, and the phone call went, hello, do you hear me? Yeah, I hear you. Do you hear me? Yeah, I hear you. We spent 4, 5, 6, 8 times. Do you hear me? Do I hear you? Do you hear me? That's the way it went. That was pretty much what you got across. Are you okay? I'm okay. Are you okay? I love you. Goodbye. Boom. $100.
Oh my gosh.
Then
$100 back then. Wow.
To make a phone call.
Wow. We don't realize how good we have it. Woof. I mean, you have to.
Yes and no. There's positives about it, and there's some.
So true. So true. So I want to, because in the interest of time, I want to get to this part of the story. How did a good Jewish, idealistic boy like yourself end up in the middle of an Israeli prison? What on earth did you do to land yourself in that situation? I'd like to hear this.
Okay.
Or I'd like to share it with our listeners. I've heard it before.
Okay. I'll tell you. It started out very innocently. I was walking down the hall of the dormitory. And in vaudeville acts, when they wanted to get somebody off the stage, they take a cane and they pull him off the stage. You don't even know what vaudeville is, I probably. Anyway, so they pull the guy off the stage with the cane. I'm walking in the hallway, and all of a sudden I get pulled into one of the dorm rooms. What's going on? They were planning a demonstration. Now, when we say demonstration, it's not a demonstration like they hear today about the burning of garbage and the burning of tires and the hurting of people and the fighting with the cops. It wasn't that. The idea was to call attention. They'll call attention to a wrong that was being committed. And the wrong that was being committed was that, Israel was taking in Jews from all over the world, but certainly from Arab countries, from Iran, from Iraq, from Tunisia, from Morocco, and so on and so forth. These were people, most of them at that time were illiterate. There were some people that were not, but the majority of people that were illiterate and they didn't know very much, but they knew they wanted to be in Israel, and they were bringing them into the land of Israel, living in very, very poverty. Literally living in poverty. And at that time, Israel, you have to get the sense of the political perspective, how Israel was in regard to the rest of the world. And they didn't want to, scratch the eyes out of the world out there. And they wanted to, be kind of as ecumenical as you could possibly be under the circumstances of it being a Jewish state. But so therefore, there were these people that were taking advantage of this, and they opened up missionary schools in order to grab Jewish children away from their homes. Not they didn't kidnap them, but they enticed the parents to come to their schools with shoes, with food, with bribe, all kinds of bribes. And they showed them here books in Hebrew, but it was books in Hebrew that was full of Christian ideas. And they would take these kids and they would try to, inculcate them with Christianity. So this was something that was going on, the missionaries. And there was a group of young, very idealistic people who determined that they were going to call the world's attention that this is after the Holocaust. What are you? We lost 6 million people, and now you're going to take away our little kinderlach, our little children. It was, anyway. So I'm walking down. I didn't know anything about this, but I'm walking down. Oh, they pulled me in. Why did you pull me in? Because Silver, you're an American. And there weren't too many other Americans with me in that Israeli yeshiva. Yes, I am. I want you to translate this placard that they had written in Hebrew, and I had to translate it in English. So there should be an English placard. So when the news people would come to the demonstration, they would see, the English as well as the Hebrew. So that's what I did. So when the day of the demonstration came, I really wasn't that involved in the planning, but when the day came, I wrote it up. I wanted to see what was going on. So I went along with everybody else. And then, unfortunately, we saw these kids. It took a long time till we found the kids. And that's why one of the reasons the police came, because they took the kids, and instead of them being in the school, they put them in a private house of one of the people that was running this missionary school. And so we found them and we came in them, and it was really breaking and entering, to say, officially, that's what it was, because we didn't ask, they didn't give us permission to come in. We saw these kids sitting around the perimeter of the room, sitting there, were shaking, literally shaking, fear, you can't imagine. They were told by these people were coming to cut their ears off, to gouge their eyes out. And we realized that we got to do something. So when we saw these kids, the first thing we did is we said, Shema Yisrael, and we started saying Shema with these kids. And they all responded. They saw it. They knew that this was home. They knew that they had heard this from the time they were born, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu Hashem. So they were saying Shema, and then these people standing there, when we said Shema Yisrael, God is one, said, no, God is three. And this was the milieu. And of course, they called the police, and the police came. And eventually, there was a scuffle here, a scuffle there, pushing here, pushing there. And in the end, 8 of us were arrested. How I got to be among them, I don't know. I was in the right place at the right time. Anyway, to make a long story short, we were arrested, and we went from jail to jail. The jail experience there in the city jail was horrible, but it was, all right. That was for 2 days until they worked it out, and they let us go out on bail and so on and so forth. And then there was a trial, and then the trial, I remember our defense attorney saying, let me ask you a question. And he put it to the judge, basically. And I remember her name yet. It was a lady judge. See, Israel, even at that time, was already far ahead of the game. It was a lady judge in the 60s. Mrs. Schwarzman Verlinsky was her name. Anyway, why I remember that, I don't know. But I'll tell you this. He said, let me ask you a question. If you saw somebody hang a Nazi flag from their balcony, from the Mirpeset, and somebody runs in and rips it down, would you arrest him for trespassing? These children, these were Jewish children, were bought with shoes, and they were and our job basically was not to steal the kids, but to get their addresses and to talk to the parents, and that's what we were intending to do. But as it turned out, we were arrested, and ultimately there was a trial, and we were sentenced an enormous fine. And then I'll tell you, you saw the greatness of how one Jew loves another Jew.
How long were you sentenced for?
Well, in a minute. I'll just tell you a second. Before they get to there, there were people that mortgaged their homes to pay the fines that we had to pay, the
Wow.
8 of us. Mortgaged their homes. I mean, it was just like, it was just beautiful. We were originally sentenced to 2 months in prison, and we had 2 or 3 years that if we ever get caught doing something like that again, then you got even more. But we didn't stay there for 2 months. We only ended up staying there. There was an appeal, this, that. We stayed there simply for 30 days. And the first 5 days of those 30 days, I don't want to go into all the grimy details, but it was not pleasant. It really, really wasn't. And some of the people took advantage of us. But after that, and after the appeal and so on, there was only another 25 days left. All of a sudden, the public opinion changed when the story got out. You can't imagine but there wasn't any dignitary that didn't come to visit us in prison. The minister of religion, the minister of the internal minister, people, all the chief rabbis, all of them came to visit us in prison to give us strength, to give us a sense of, we're with you, you did the right thing, so on. You saw something and you did something to make a difference. And the only real downside of all of that was, and then we even had, you want to hear this, we even had cholent on Shabbos. We even made our own cholent after things got easier. You know what cholent is? That's that hot, delicious meal that you have Shabbos day that you start cooking all night long. And it's beans and barley and potatoes and meat. And we had cholent in prison. So you can imagine how terrible it was.
You were well taken care of.
Ultimately, yeah. Ultimately, it was good. So, but my parents.
I was just going to ask you, what did your mother do when she found out that you were?
Well, I don't know what my mother did, but I know what my father did. My father was in the yeshiva, and he was in the library of the yeshiva in Chicago, and they would get these periodicals from Israel, and there was a big headline about these 8 yeshiva students that were in this demonstration and were sentenced to prison and so on. So my father says, yeah, I know, Yudi's among them. He's got to be. And then he almost fainted when he read the article and he saw my name. He did. It was, and my mother, but I have to give credit where credit's due. People from the Knesset, I still have those letters. People from the Knesset, the MKs that were from the Zionistic parties, from the religious parties, and even some from Cherut, who was not a religious party, with Esther Azil Naor, an amazing woman. She wrote to my parents, and she wrote to us. I have letters from all of those dignitaries saying to us how proud they were that Jewish young teenagers or young men were prepared to stand up and try a little bit to reach out, to touch these kids, and get them out of this very, very terrible situation that they found themselves in. That was pretty much what the story is. I mean, the rest of the details aren't important, but it's important to know, and that I know what I got out of it. What I got out of that was how important it is to care about really what's going on with somebody else who is in a less fortunate situation than you are. And if you are able to alleviate that a little bit, and if you're able to inspire them, and when we went afterwards, after it was all over, and after we got served our time, and they made big parties, I mean, it was like, when we went to prison, this is a cute story, when we went to prison, so we had to go to, the time was up for us to go to prison. So they did not send the police to pick us up, because the police were afraid to come in, because they were afraid that there'd be a whole big demonstration. So they told us to show up at the police station. We showed up at the police station, but there was a demonstration from Haifa and from Kfar Hasidim, where I was, and everybody was coming to escort us to the police station to go into prison. And
so basically, you were glorified celebrities going into prison.
That's correct. That's what ended up happening. The police locked themselves into the police station. They didn't want to come out because anyway, so they finally decided that they would come to pick us up at the yeshiva, and everybody had to identify themselves and to go into the paddy wagon, and they were going to take us to prison. We were informed that there were two of us that were from outside of Israel, who were not Israeli citizens, Americans, and an Englishman too. We were not supposed to have our passports because they could take our passports, and then there would be problems. So when they called our name, I remember the cop said, "Okay, Yehuda Silver." So I showed up, and I went up. He says, "Darkon, Tudat Zehut, show me your identifying papers. Show me, yeah, that's you." I said, "I don't have it." They told us not to have it, so I didn't have it. And so says, "How am I supposed to know who you are?" So the head of the yeshiva stood up, and he looked him in the eye, and he was a very powerful person, and he said, "I'm telling you, that's Yehuda Silver." He says, okay.
Don't mess. Okay, so I just, by hearing these stories and hearing the passion and the bravery that you had at such a young age, Tati, you can see how that set the path for you to really take your passion and your life's mission to the next level. And my father has spent really the rest of his days when he came back to the United States. I mean, that's really what the common denominator was all about, was reaching out to his fellow Jewish brothers and sisters and showing them the richness of their heritage and teaching them a little bit about their Judaism, and not only caring for them in a spiritual sense, but I grew up, my parents' home was a place where people, if they didn't have a place to stay, my parents literally housed people in their homes for months on end, fed them, took them shopping, went and took care of their physical needs also. We had people literally living in our home. As a little girl, I still remember it to this day. I wasn't always so happy about it at the time. But looking back, I saw just my home was just a place of warmth, of care, of love for another Jewish person. And that's really, I think, like so inspirational. And that's why my parents have really had the merit to see all of their children follow in their footsteps in some capacity or another. We have people that are just, their children are all so passionate about Torah and mitzvot and sharing, and the common denominator, the bottom line is just loving our fellow Jew and just doing whatever we can to take care of their needs physically and spiritually. So I want to, before we end this amazing, fascinating conversation, Tati, is there one take-home message that you'd like our listeners to take with them about your early experiences? Is there something that you can sort of like a little goodie bag, a little package that you can send back with our listeners to take with them for the rest of the day and months going on?
That's not easy, but I'll tell you, one of the things that I feel is necessary for Jewish people to realize in today's world, that Judaism is not a religion alone. They think, Judaism, when you talk about Judaism, you're talking about a religion. There's Catholicism, there's Protestantism, there's Episcopalianism, and all, you name it. You've got Islamic and so on. Judaism is not just a religion. It's not just what we believe. It's what we are. And as a unified people, we're all part of a whole. We're all, there's if I can just a little bit bring this in, there's a concept in Jewish law that if two people, for example, on Shabbos, and you have to make Kiddush on Shabbos, right? They take a cup of wine and they make the bracha and they say Kiddush. Not everyone around the table makes Kiddush. One person makes the Kiddush. But everyone has the obligation to make Kiddush. So why don't they all make the Kiddush? Because the person who is making the Kiddush has the ability to bring everyone who is listening to him, as long as they're paying attention and they answer Amen, that he can do it for them. They are Arevim. They are connected to one another in such a way that I can do something and it's considered as if you did it. So Judaism is not just a religion. It's who we are, how we live, and what we want to communicate to the world, and most importantly, to our own children. What we want to give these kids is that, and the only way it can happen is if we ourselves get inspired. If you can't give over inspiration by talking about it. You have to have that. You have to feel it. You have to live it. And when your kids see that, and they may not necessarily come along all the time, all the way, but if they really believe that it's sincere, I guarantee you there's going to be a spark that will always be able to be rekindled and turned into a beautiful flame. So that's the first thing I would say, is it's not so much what we believe, it's what we believe, the effect that it has on what we do. Like I said, we're just, if one of your fingers are hurting, your whole body is not 100% functioning correct. If one person is hurting, then the rest of it. There was can I tell you a cute story?
Sure. We have about 4 minutes, so we're good.
All right, I'll finish it up in 2. There was this Jew that came from Israel, and he was collecting money, these collectors that come for charity and collecting money because his child was getting married and he didn't have enough money to be able to provide a proper wedding. And he had a friend in Miami, and he called up his friend and he said, could you connect me with the Jewish people? And all the Jewish people opened up their hearts and they prepared to give him the help him at least collect money. And he was collecting quite a bit of money. He put it into like a money pouch he had around his where he kept around him, a money bag. And he was driving up the coast, and he was going to go to different cities along the coast and continue to. Anyway, all of a sudden, a cop comes. He was speeding, and they brought him into the city by in front of the judge. It is in these small towns, and they wanted him. He has to pay a fine of $250. So the guy opens up his belt, and he starts peeling off $250 of the money that he had to pay. This just happened to be the route of the drug dealers going back and forth.
Oh my goodness.
So they said to him, where'd you get that money? He says, what do you mean, where did I get the money? He said, I collected it. He says, what do you mean you collected it? How'd you collect it? He said, I went to people. I told them my daughter has to get married. You telling me that he's giving you money so you can marry off your daughter, collect? I don't believe you. Bring an affidavit from these people that, you got this money for them honestly. So now this poor guy, what was he going to do? He calls up his friend. He says, help me. And sure enough, he got all these affidavits and he sent them in, and the judge could do nothing about it. He says, okay, you're free to go. So he's happy to get out of there. He's driving out of there. And he's out of the town, and all of a sudden there's the cop behind him. Yeah, he says, oh my goodness, what did I do now? Cop stops him. He comes over to him. He says, listen, you weren't speeding this time, but I stopped you because I have to ask you a question. Did you really collect this money from all these people because your daughter is getting married? Did they give you money? And he said to him, yes. And the guy looked at him and says, you know what? I joined the wrong religion. When the Jew in Argentina is hurting, the Jew in Canada is prepared to help. When the Jew in China is in great trouble, the Jew in, Timbuktu is prepared to help. That's what I mean by we're part of one entity. We have to feel that we're connected to one another and that what happens to you matters to me, both in joy and in sadness. And the payoff of this is enormous. The spiritual pleasure that you get out of it, as I always tell people, physical pleasure is also very nice. A good steak, not perfectly done, with a glass of wine, right? Wonderful. Can you imagine something like perfect? Let me ask something. Today, I say to you, you ready to have another steak? And he says, yeah, I'd like another steak. I said, no. I said, why don't you just enjoy yesterday's steak? You had one yesterday, enjoy it again. You can't enjoy yesterday's steak. But when you do a mitzvah, when you do something for another person, when you do something that you feel is connecting you to something that's outside of you, as we said before, right at the beginning, an entity that is outside of our limited physical world, it stays forever. And you can always enjoy it. Enjoy your Judaism. That's what the Almighty put us in this world to have, is the pleasure of being close to Him and the pleasure of being close to one another as Jews.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. And as you're speaking, it's like we have this feeling of being close to one another and helping each other out. And by default, that makes us the sort of the prototype for the nations of the world to view us as the way people should conduct themselves. It's really what we are in this world to do, is to be this shining light, the shining beacon of kindness and being loving and fair judgment. That's who we are as the Jewish people, that Hashem has given us this responsibility to show the rest of the world who we should be by our actions. So it's not only within our own circles, but also it pours over onto the world at large, which is a tremendous responsibility and beautiful mission as well.
Correct.
So
I'm very proud of you, Shifra.
Oh, thanks. I had a very good teacher. I learned from the best. So my friends, everybody who's listening, I just want to thank you so much for joining us again. And stay tuned, join our Spark Facebook page. And if you want to subscribe to our Join Journal, the umbrella organization, so you can be kept apprised of all of our programming. We'd love to have you join us. And I hope you enjoyed listening as much as I enjoyed interviewing my father. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye.